Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whatever time you are watching this. This will be a discussion about a documentary that was uploaded by GMA Public Affairs, Ang School Kong Bakwit, documented by Atom Araudio. This is about the people who were caught in the crossfire in Mindanao between the state and the NPA. Basically, Bakwit means to evacuate because they moved from Mindanao to urban places like Manila. They carried on with their life and their school. But even in school, they move from place to place and they don't have any permanent places to stay. Hence the term Bakwit School. So we are tasked to answer 7 questions, and between questions there will be a discussion, questions if there are any, or analysis. I happen to be question number 1, so this is my answer to that.
What is the difference between Lumad School and public school under DepEd? And do I think one is better than the other? Firstly, I would say what was mentioned in the documentary, that in Lumad School, they give away free food and they are not required to wear a uniform. Conversely, in DepEd School, they require their student to buy their own food and their own uniform. Another difference that was mentioned is their facility and their equipments, because as we all know, these people are not the most financially prosperous. Irene, one of the Lumad student, mentioned that even if their whiteboard is in poor condition, they would still conduct classes. Another difference is their curriculum revolves around agriculture. This is because these people value their indigenous domain. It was mentioned that they get their food and their medicines from the land. So it only makes sense that they would put their values in alignment with their education system. In another documentary, it was mentioned that they need to wake up before 5 to start their farming, as they refer to it. And at 8, they would start their flag raising ceremony and other equally important subjects like math, science, values education. It's not that different from DepEd curriculum. That's why I thought that's one absurd reason for their closure. But that's not for me to answer. The big difference is not the facility, not the equipment, not the requiring of student to wear uniform and all of that, but the students themselves. So I asked myself, what constitutes a school? Indeed, what is a school without students? In the documentary, another student mentioned that in Lumad School, they were being taught how to be makamasa, makabayan, at scientificong kabataan. She was obviously saying that Lumad School is better, but I don't think that is the case since there's very little difference between the curriculum and they both intend to educate. But what made Lumad students distinct is their adversities. You see, in urban places where DepEd schools are usually situated, most people are likely to devaluate their studies. I'm not saying all of them, but it's observable. They have time for drinking, for messing around, for cutting classes. They are pampered, man. And you would often hear them say, hindi ko naman magagamit sa totoong buhay yan. Hindi ko naman magagamit sa trabaho yan. Research pang nalalaman. And not to mention those kids who would rather spend their time on internet cafes rather than acquiring knowledge, utilizing their time. And those kids who need to be forced just to go to school. Whilst in Lumad community, there's a constant threat of violence. Shooting, murder, accusation, execution, orphaning of children. They live in hell, man. And they know education can get them out of that place. Or at least reform it. There's an abundance of documentaries about these people. Now I'm speaking generally of indigenous people. And I bet you've watched one of these documentaries where they would walk hours or days just to reach their destination, their school, and that's what makes them distinct. They're not doing this out of choice. They're doing this out of necessity. And when you're in those kinds of situation, going to school is a privilege. And that's, I think, one of the advantages of being raised in poverty, in the middle of the war, or just the ditch of life, man, is that when good things come, you don't take them for granted.
Insights, yes.
So yeah. School is the privilege, but education is the right. The way you actually differentiate Lumad school and public school is that it depends on the students' determination and how they value education. I actually agree with that. Lumad students wishes to have education because they wishes to do something, while some students wishes to go to school just because they have to go to school because it is the wish of the parents, not themselves.
Any other insight?
One school is better than the other. When it comes to educational institutions and educational resources, then yes, I would say one is more established than the other. This does not imply that the Lumad schools are not good, because obviously they do not have the absolute means to help in the establishment of their schools.
Right. Speaking of schools, this is a good transition to their closure. Question, which brings us to question number 2. Take
What
it away.
are the reasons for the shutdown by the DepEd? Do you think that the closure was proper? Well, in a DepEd interview interview, they said that the closure of Lumad School was because some schools were not following the DepEd curriculums, and many of the voluntary teachers were not licensed. That is why they are not authorized to teach young Lumads. Instead, they close it without understanding their resentment. Also, National Security Council linked Lumad schools that they have been leading leftist teachings, and they teach how to start a revolt and against the government. Up to 215 Lumad school campuses have been labeled as being run by communist organizations. Students, teachers, and even parents were falsely accused by supporting the New People's Army and the Communist Party of the Philippines, which the government described as enemies of peace and order. The majority of Lumad school campuses were forced to close as a result of this haphazard and unfounded accusation. They have served as justification for militarization, harassment, and other acts of state-sanctioned violence that are rampant in Lumad ancestral domain. The closure of Lumad schools is pure discrimination against them. As the start of Duterte administration, the bias of Lumad schools undoubtedly got worse. Most of the voluntary teachers were red tagged as communists and terrorists, and some of them were tortured and exterminated. DepEd said they were not following the DepEd's curriculum. Instead, they were teaching against government education. But this is somehow debunked since Lumad schools use a nationalistic, scientific, and mass-oriented curriculum approved by the Department of Education to optimize the agricultural skills of the Lumad for the development of their communities. The foundation of their curriculum is inclusive, makamasa, patriotic, makabayan, and scientific, scientifico. Students are also taught how to be independent in order to support themselves and their fellow students. Through tasking, they are taught how to be good leaders. Through different activities, they are given the avenue to heal from the impact of abuses and human rights violation inflicted by state forces. For the Lumad, Bakwit schools are the highest form of their expression on the assertion of their rights. It serves as the Lumad's community's protest against the Duterte regime's relentless attack on Lumad schools in Mindanao. Even with their schools in Mindanao shut down, Lumad students still strive to assert their rights that would equip them to protect their ancestral lands from development aggression forwarded by the states. Lumad schools became forms of resistance of the Lumad against the attempts of the state to deprive them of their right to education and against development aggression in their communities.
So, any insights po?
Comment lang sa akin, maganda yung delivery. Eye contact.
You actually said that it's about politics, why they actually, well, I agree with that. Because the Lumad students transferring to Manila and the killing happened during the martial law in Mindanao. It is said that Lumad schools are built to fight against those people who discriminated their rights. They are labeled as the New People Army, the communists, because teachers or instructors teach the students these things to be a communist, which in fact is not appropriate. They shouldn't label those people with that just because they created a school for them so that they can learn. So yeah.
Right. I think we all agree to that. It's not really the curriculum or what, it's just purely political, or at least primarily motivated by that. Speaking of which, let us go to the next question.
According to the speakers in the video, what should have been done by the government to address the problem with these Lumad schools? Why? Chaos, killing, land stealing. These are the problems that Lumad community has faces. However, there is much more. They are deprived of education and stripped of their rights. Unting sulok na matutulugan, unting lupang masasaka, at isang paaralan para sa mga isip na uhaw sa tunay na karunungan. Yan ang sinisigaw ni Atom Marolyo para sa mga batang may pangarap na kinabukasan. Unting sulok na matutulugan. Because of chaos and the promises of the government, the Lumad students that once studied in mountains traveled to Manila. However, they received nothing. That is why Atom shouts for a place where the Lumad people can stay in. Unting lupang masasaka. The first thing that the elders teach their child is to do work and take care of the land. It is where they seek food and medication. Isang paaralan. The Lumad students have a big dream. However, because of the lack of resources and because of discrimination, they are having a hard time to study. They need a school where they can learn properly.
They are not afraid of death. However, they are afraid to lose their culture, land, and identity. They are afraid that they will remain ignorant.
I think you've covered all the problems there. And just in addition that while they are addressing the problem of war, they are evacuating people there. But that seems to me like it's a means to rid of people out of their domain so they could let these companies operate in their land. So it's kind of difficult to judge these situations.
I forgot actually to include that they are nomad. They transfer from one place to another just because they don't have a place to stay in. Just an addition to that.
To learn more about this topic, let us proceed with question number 4, which is a very simple question, yet our colleague here made it more verbose, and let's see his answer. Question number 4.
Why do you think these Lumad schools are important and why? The Lumad have long had trouble enrolling in or being admitted to mainstream, public or private schools. To keep their children in school, the Lumad have had to travel far distances and spend national travel and living expenditures because there aren't many such schools in the areas where they dwell. Due to their difficulties understanding the language of teaching used in mainstream schools since Lumad language are their mother tongue, Lumad pupils frequently fall behind other students. As a result, the construction of Lumad School was a social and historical imperative. This is to meet the needs, represent the ideals, and exemplify the Lumad vision. Currently, nearly all of Mindanao's 215 Lumad schools have ceased operations. These attacks include forced closures, illegal arrests of students, and aerial bombings. But why do I think it's important? As a Filipino and an IP member myself, I do believe in the right of education, and the right to education has always been at the heart of Lumad schools, meaning that having access, it gives one the knowledge, abilities, and self-assurance to obtain additional rights, in which I agree. And I do believe that everyone should have an access to this fundamental right. It is a powerful tool in developing everyone's potential, upholding human dignity, and advancing both individual and group well-being. That's all.
Okay, all of his answers are systematically accurate. In addition to his answer, these schools are important because it also empower Lumad children to protect their lands and lives, frustrating the attempts of the state to control indigenous people. Lumad school is essential for giving them rights to have an education, practicing their freedom, and yielding critical development benefits. That is why this facility is a paramount belongings to have education for Lumad people.
In the documentary, it was mentioned that the ancestors of the Lumads are not that educated. That's the reason why they were prone to exploitation, right? So the importance of this Lumad school is similar to what Bian said. It is the foundation of knowledge for protection and knowledge of the children. And also, it's actually good that Lumad school are getting established kasi it will help them in fighting their lands. Yeah.
This will be another good transition to the next question, which discusses about the other struggles that was depicted and in the documentary and other struggles that was not depicted there. So there's much more. Number 5. Let's go.
First question here is that what are the other struggles of Lumad as depicted in the documentary? The deprivation of education, that is first and foremost. This happens because the educational buildings of the Lumads are getting disturbed. They get invaded by men in uniform, and sometimes this type of invasion forces the Lumad community to move out of their abodes and of their lands. Another reason as why they are forced to move out is that they get sandwiched between the fight of New People's Army and military government. Because of these factors, they find alternative place to conduct their education and a place to stay. Another question is that what struggles are faced by Lumads other than those in the documentary? The other struggles from other resources like the documentary Lumad School Under Attack released by Bukhaw Organization Philippines. Here, the Lumads lack access of the basic social services from the government. It is one of the reasons why the educational curriculum of the Lumads are different from the curriculum of the majority educational curriculums. They also go through harassment, racism, and violence, for the reason that they are fighting for their lands and rights. Another struggle that comes from another resource is the constant red tagging on the Lumads, wherein the Lumad receive local threat from their local authorities just because they are asking for their rights. And this documentary is released by Magandang Gabi Pilipinas.
Lumad in general is suffering not only from being deprived with education, but also with a lot of things because they are not being recognized. It is said by Kyla, they are being constantly threatened and punished just because they are asking for their rights. They only flash the pictures that some Lumad people actually died.
Additional is the militarization of the Lumad lands because of the corporate companies who wants to get resources from their rich lands. Yeah.
In your opinion, what other programs should the government implement to address the problems faced by the Lumads? So the problems that should be the government implement to address these problems should be focused on their priorities. The states need to respect the principle of free, prior, and informed consent. Indigenous people need to be consulted about use of their land and included in development processes.
Government should affirm the law that protecting the indigenous people, like yung mga batas dapat ay baguhin kasi yung mga batas na yun ay hindi na kakamtan dahil sa mapang-abusong gobyerno.
In the video, I don't actually see any programs. So I'm gonna give one. I actually look at our research. I saw a residential school. It is a program that was implemented in Canada and India. However, it was labeled as a horror because residential school killed 4,000 plus Indians. However, I look into it. The reason that it is not good is because of the purpose. Introduce Christianity to them so that their culture will be removed. However, if we actually implement residential school for the Lumads and change the purpose of it by preserving their culture, then I think residential school will actually be a fit program for the Lumad.
My realization is that despite adapting foreign language, they embrace more culture even more as they study beyond that. Their education serves to strengthen their neighborhood and defend their native territory.
My greatest realization is I am grateful that I don't experience the grievance that Luma people experience. Being a citizen in this nation, we must take part in solidarity to fight for their rights and freedom for the ancestral domain, right to education, and youth is the hope of the country. We always have remembered that we should be united in protecting our schools because in the midst of hustle and bustle of the metro, the Lumad people fight to make their voices heard in order to tell a tale. They keep their heads high and their resolve strong and tirelessly chase after justice, which they are not doubtless what they will grasp within their hands despite the complexity of the situation. The Lumad people only wish for a simple and peaceful life in which their rights to their education, self-determination, and land are recognized and respected. Dreams are the blueprint for the future, and every time there is an attempt to destroy that future, the Lumad people rise to build again and again toward reclaiming their identity. At hindi ba yun ang ibig sabihin ng pagiging isang tunay na Pilipino?
One of my aggressive realization actually is that what the other generation started or failed to fix will greatly affect the next generation. Whether they like it or not, they don't have a choice. It is actually sad how strong the people get affected just by a reckless decision. And I am not just referring to the indigenous people here, but also to the overall nation or population. Another realization is that I noticed how the prevalent problems and issues in the educational system that is obviously spotted but is rather left hanging for the minority group to absorb its utmost impacts.
Let me repeat the quote earlier. School is a privilege, education is a right. We are privileged not because we are well off, but we have the resources that helps us study, understand, or learn more than the Lumad. It is also a right. They shouldn't be deprived by education because they are also a citizen of the country. They have the right to be educated. It is stated by the Lumad who was being interviewed during the documentary. Save our education, stop Lumad killing. They are being deprived with everything. The land, education, their culture. It's actually saddening to know that there are such people. There are such people that took advantage or take advantage advantage of those who is weaker than them. It's frightening what people can do because of greed. They say, ang buhay ay lupa, because they believe that the land that they have is their culture and future.
My realization about this documentary is, with all the conflicts that was mentioned, I think it is not about the Lumad, but it's about these big authorities. They don't stop and think about how their actions would affect these people. When you are in a position of power and when you are affecting other people, even one person, with your actions, we ought to consider our decision before we carry out our actions. And so I will end this discussion with the African proverb: when elephants fight, the grass gets trampled.